Recreation and Tourism will now come to order. The clerk will call the roll.
Chair Frulo.
Here.
Representative Fairclough.
Here.
Representative Bonin. Representative Martinez.
Here.
Representative Kraus.
Here.
Representative Fallon.
Present.
Representative Irvin Hawkins.
A quorum is present. I'd like to welcome everybody to our first committee meeting for Culture, Recreation, and Tourism to the beautiful city of Brownsville. And also would like to let everybody know if you're testifying, you must be registered, and you can do that by filling out the paper witness affirmation form. If you have issues with that, please get a hold of our committee clerk, Taylor, here. I'd like to thank all the members for making it down here. Appreciate the coming over. Mondo, of course, you had a quick trip. We had a couple of airplane delays there, but we all made it here. And also like to thank the Parks and Recreation for your hospitality, of course, everybody's hospitality here. First off, I'd like to recognize Senator Lucio here to say a few opening remarks, if you would, please. And thank you for coming over and visiting with us.
Mr. Chairman, good morning, members of the committee. I'm extremely happy to join with you this morning. First and foremost, I would like to thank Chairman John Frulo for bringing this committee to the Rio Grande Valley. And I think Representative Martinez might have had a little bit to do with that, and we thank our great representative from the Valley. I would also like to thank the members of the committee, upstanding, great members that I have known over the years, for taking time to come to this region that I call my home. This is my hometown. This is where I was born. I'm even par, so you know how long ago that was. Brownsville, though, is a diverse city that takes pride in its people, culture, and wildlife. This city is unlike no other along the Texas border. Believe me, it is on the border, right on the border, and by the sea. You can't find another border city like that. We're lucky to say that we're home to a wide range of species of both animals and plants, and we're at the point of entry for imports and exports here in Brownsville. That goods that come through our port of Brownsville, that is our jewel of a venue. This uniqueness affords us the opportunity to grow as a city and further develop our economy to become successful. We are a bustling city that is a vacation destination to some, but it's also the home to many, many others. For over 30 years, I have represented Senate District 27, and through my tenure, I have witnessed the change this city has undergone. That is why today I am glad all of you are here to experience firsthand all the diversities and opportunities the Rio Grande Valley has to offer. I am confident that this hearing will be a productive one, and hopefully it will provide you with great insight and useful information as you return back to your jobs. I would be remiss if I didn't thank Wayne Fairclough today. We have worked very well together over the years, Wayne. I know that you would not be reporting back, I'm told, this next session, but I wanted to publicly thank you for the great attitude and the method by which you had your open door policy for us in this, in the Senate side. It was always a pleasure to work with you and to communicate with you, and I want to publicly thank you, sir, for the years that we worked together. Of course, Pat, I want to welcome you to Texas Senate, in case people that are here present do not know. This young man, I call him Mr. Atlas, will be reporting to the Senate, and I look forward to the future Senator Fallon to to work with him in behalf of the state of Texas. I want to leave you all with a thought. I think one of the most important activities that takes place each year, Mr. Chairman, members, is Memorial Day. We just went through it, and I know that all of you were involved in Memorial Day back in your districts. I know you were. It's a time for us to reflect and thank those that fell in the battlefield, upholding the democracies that we hold very dear to our hearts, the liberties and rights that belong to the American people. As I was addressing a group in Fort Texas, I couldn't help but think, Senator, where I had traveled during the course of my life, and it hit me at heart at the time I was speaking. So I shared a little story with them. I was in the Philippines, and there is a moral to this story, and I'll explain it at the end of the short story. I was in the Philippines, and I got in a taxi cab, Matt, and he started driving me toward my meeting. And on the way to that meeting, I was enjoying the sights. Never been in Manila, the Philippines before. And all of a sudden, I see these white crosses as far as the eye could see. Incredible amount of crosses, thousands of crosses. And I told the taxi cab driver to please stop. And I got down, and I says, I'll be right back. I'll pay you extra. Please bear with me. Because I saw the sign. It was an American cemetery. And those were the young men that were killed in the line of duty, upholding our democracies and all, in the Philippines, thousands of them. And they had the name of the state and the last name of the soldier that had fallen there, Representative. And I was just in a daze, but I was thinking about them, the fact that they never got home. I was thinking about the parents and the fact that they could have been my father, because that was World War II. And I felt terrible. And then I looked at the beautiful symmetrical crosses that were placed, and as I stepped to the left, I saw all those crosses turn into one. I stepped to the right, the other crosses would all turn into one. And I couldn't help but think that those soldiers were there not as Democrats or Republicans or independents, not as Catholics or any other form of religion or denomination. They were there as an American soldier, the American uniform. They were a family, an American family of soldiers that had fought together and died together. And as you and I have heard, regardless of the churches we go to, that is the greatest gift we can give our brother, our neighbor, is to die for them. And I couldn't help but think that we too, in the Texas legislature today, no matter what house you're in, what chamber, we're a legislative branch. And we come together from every sector of the state as one state, one family of men and women who have a job to do for the people of our great state. And today, I leave you with the thought that we're Texans, we're Americans, but we're men and women who really care about our fellow man, about our neighbor, about wanting to do the right thing as we move through this life of ours, which is not very long. And you know what I mean. We're passing through. So I want you to know I have a great deal of respect for the houses. I served there 4 years. And that hallway that we see between the House of Representatives and the Senate, it's a hallway that doesn't separate us, but a hallway that unites us. That unites us not only as a branch of government, but it unites us as men and women, brothers and sisters that we are in the human race. And I needed to share that with you because I have, a great deal of respect. We're preparing ourselves to go back, to come together and find solutions for the people of Texas. And it's incumbent on us to understand our role and our responsibility and to respect one another if we disagree with an issue and go on and try to find middle ground so that everyone can benefit somehow. And I just want to thank you for the work you do. If anyone knows it, I do, as you well know, after 34 years. And my community has blessed me, has encouraged me to be there, and I'll continue, obviously, to echo the sentiments of the people that I represent in District 27. And I hope that we can find solutions for every sector of the state that you come from, the districts that you represent, because that's our duty for you. We have a responsibility to listen to you and to try to find answers for the issues that are important to you and the people in your districts. But we're all one Texas family, and that's the point I wanted to make here today. And I'm pleased and proud and honored to be part of that Texas family we call the Texas Legislature. And again, have a wonderful day. We have, I'm sure, some people that are going to share with you information that is pertinent, important for us to take into consideration as we tackle the issues that come up in this next legislative session. Mr. Chairman, members, once again, thank you. Have a blessed day, and please come back to the Valley. We will be waiting with a bunch of taquitos and whatever else is necessary to make you like us even better. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Lucio, and this is kind of a hard act to follow. That's quite the story. We appreciate your hospitality, the hospitality that the city and the area has shown us, and I think all of us can say we'll be back. So thank you again. Thanks for those great comments. Appreciate it. Members, before we get going, are there any comments that anybody would like to make? All righty, thank you. Today we're going to be hearing our interim charge number 4, and it has to do with the monitoring charge, and we'll be hearing from the Texas Historical Commission, the Parks and Wildlife, and also possibly the Space Tourism Project going on here in Brownsville. At this point, I'd like to call up Mark Wolf, the Executive Director of the Historical Commission, and I think Colonel Jones, is that okay? Colonel Jones, if you'll make your way up and, yes, sir, sit at the table. Morning, Mark.
Good morning, sir.
And just to remind you, if you'll state your name, who you represent, and we'll get going.
All right, sir. Well, Mr. Chairman, my name is Mark Wolf. I'm the Executive Director of the Texas Historical Commission. Good to see you all here. I am not, obviously, Chairman John Now, who had every intention of being here with you today, and on his behalf, I extend his apologies. He had a conflict this afternoon. He knew he was going to have to take off fairly quickly after testifying this morning, and that meeting ended up getting moved up. So that's where he's going to be, and he did, however, send me with his remarks, so I'll share those with you, if I may. I also have with me today Commissioner Lilia Garcia of Brownsville, a newly appointed commissioner, Joseph Bell, Deputy Executive Director for State Historic Sites, Brad Patterson, Director of our Community Heritage Development Division, that's where our heritage tourism programs live, and Vaughn Aldridge, our Government Relations Specialist. So first, if I may, on the Chairman's behalf, he asked that I bring you a little up to date on your interim charge number 1, the impact of Hurricane Harvey on the Texas Historical Commission and some historic sites here in Texas. We did provide you, I believe, with a one-page recap on the damage of 5 of the THC-operated state historic sites. Recent conversations with FEMA give us some confidence that federal funding may offset up to 90% of the more than $3 million in restoration and repair costs needed for those sites, and we'll provide the committee with an update once we know more about the federal support opportunity. Under federal law, our agency is also required to review any federal actions that might affect historic resources in Texas, and we have 30 days to do that review. And of course, after something like a hurricane, there's an enormous amount of federal activity in Texas.
Mark, let me stop you for a second. Can you hear him okay back there? Okay, I wasn't quite sure. Thank you. Go ahead, Mark.
I wasn't either, thank you.
Well, this is important. We want to make sure people can hear it, so.
Thank you, sir. So we do have 30 days to review any federal actions that might affect historic properties. And immediately after the hurricane, there were over 200 debris pile locations that had to be approved. And I want you to know we turned some of those around within 15 minutes. More than half of them were turned around within 24 hours. And we've had a great relationship with FEMA. We have a programmatic agreement with them that was in place before the hurricane that provides a list of exclusions. So projects that we don't even need to see, things that they can just move forward on without even talking to us. And then they took the great step in October and November of hiring 2 full-time staff, well, 2 part-time staff people, an archaeologist and an architectural historian, both of them former employees of our agency who can sit in the FEMA offices and sign off on projects on our behalf. So we have a very effective working relationship trying to get through this emergency response. While resources are limited, our advice is sometimes accompanied by financial support. We've made $165,000 in grants to assist property owners with Harvey damage, and we have another $80,000 available. That's all out of our trust fund grant program. When I came ashore in 2008, THC staff consultation lasted nearly 8 years. So we have every expectation that this is not going to get put to bed here in the next year or two. It takes a significant amount of time for those federal agencies to carry out their work, and as I said, we have to review that work. Damaged properties include historic courthouses in Aransas and Refugio counties. We reluctantly agreed to demolition of the courthouse in Rockport. The historic courthouse preservation grants in April included a $450,000 emergency grant for Refugio County. FEMA funding will help each of those counties with demolition, restoration, and new construction costs. Weather experts say 20 trillion gallons of water fell on South and East Texas in the 4 or 5 days after Harvey made landfall. Heritage tourism, a major economic driver in Texas, was profoundly and negatively affected by the storm. It's a $71 billion travel market, and we work closely with the Texas Travel Industry Association in addition to our other important work to make sure that recovery is as swift as possible. History-related travel in the forest and Independence Trail regions of our Texas Heritage Trails program was curtailed by Harvey, but we're happy to say that much of that activity is coming back 9 months later, and our other 8 Heritage Trail regions serving every other town and county in Texas may have experienced increased traffic in the meantime. On interim charge number 4, I'll give you a little status report on the economic development THC programs, some of which I just mentioned. Heritage tourism, historic county courthouse preservation, and the operation of historic sites across the state, programs that you all helped to preserve and enhance in the last session. Texas history means business. As my chairman likes to say, it means jobs and economic opportunity. THC efforts educate our youth and protect our precious historic places so they can be a magnet for millions of tourists from around the world, generating billions of dollars for the state's economy annually. When it comes to jobs and economic development, historic preservation is not an alternative to economic growth. It is a driving component of it. The total impact of historic preservation in Texas is more than $4.6 billion annually, supporting 79,000 jobs. The state of Texas's modest investment in these programs help to pay big economic development benefits. In 2015, Rutgers University and UT Austin released a report on the economic impact of historic preservation in Texas. They found that business and leisure travelers to Texas who credit visiting a historic site as a primary activity spent close to $7.3 billion in 2013, accounting for approximately 12.5% of total direct travel spending in Texas. These expenditures support hotels, motels, bed and breakfast, food establishments, and other local retail and service businesses, supporting over 50,000 jobs, contributing over $2 billion to the state's labor income annually. Our most popular and iconic destinations are Texas's historic places, but for every Alamo or NASA mission control, there are thousands of lesser-known heritage sites that could be developed and publicized, and that's the work of the Heritage Trails program. Since 1998, the Trails program has been the primary source of heritage tourism information for the traveling public. It consists of 10 heritage regions covering every Texas county, each operated by its own nonprofit board of directors, coordinating their efforts through the THC. These board members and hundreds of other volunteers dedicate an enormous amount to this effort, providing more than 70,000 volunteer hours since 2006. The Heritage Trail regions are mapped and referenced in all of our tourism brochures and websites. In addition to guides to historic places in Texas, we have guides online, mobile tours to the Red River War of 1874-75 up in the Panhandle, to African American and Hispanic historic sites and places significant to the Texas Battle of Independence or World War I or World War II. We maintain TexasTimeTravel.com, a portal to heritage tourism information across the state, including the distribution of 7.5 million print travel guides through such sites as the TxDOT travel centers. We do continue to develop print guides. Surprisingly, there's a huge demand for those, despite the fact that we keep trying to direct people towards digital products. But we're going to keep producing those, and we hope to continue to re-gear those so they're more attractive to millennial and to young family travelers. These efforts are critical to smaller and underserved communities in Texas. Before our last session, the city manager of Spearman, Texas, up in the Panhandle near Oklahoma, about an hour's drive from Kansas, testified that their motel hotel tax collects about $10,000 a year. The Heritage Trails program is very important to communities like Spearman and the region, which is rich in history and heritage and threadbare in funding availability for tourism marketing and outreach. The federal funds used to support the Heritage Trails program in the recent past are no longer available. At last session, we were able to restore $1.5 million for the biennium with your support. Keeping the Heritage Trails program going strong is one of our primary goals for the 2019 legislative session. Each of the trail boards will raise as much as they can in their own regions, but this is a statewide program, and we hope the legislature will continue to support their efforts and enable them to continue to provide a significant boost to the state's economy. Iconic Texas courthouses are the civic, cultural, and commercial heart of many of our communities. Courthouse preservation and restoration has a significant economic impact, not only in terms of materials and labor related to the work itself, but for many years after the work is done in terms of heritage tourism and downtown redevelopment. Since it was established in 1999, the state has invested more than $290 million in its historic county courthouses. That investment has been matched by the counties with more than $240 million, resulting in support for about 10,000 jobs and generating income exceeding $270 million. The program has produced state and local taxes of more than $43 million. Since 1999, our agency has participated in 67 full courthouse restorations. We just rededicated the Karnes County Courthouse in Karnes City a few weeks ago. It was a cold, windy day, which is sort of hard to believe today, but I think the whole county showed up for that event. But we have about 75 more courthouses participating in the program that qualify for and desperately need the state's assistance. A restored county courthouse becomes seed corn for economic development, particularly the businesses that open in and around the courthouse square. Courthouse squares host countless festivals attracting visitors from all over the state. They serve as backdrops for wedding pictures. We regularly hear reports of towns with revitalized courthouse squares that credit the restoration of their courthouses being the investment that tipped the scale toward economic vitality making private investment possible. This is particularly true in those communities participating also in the Texas Historical Commission's Main Street program. Towns like St. Augustine have seen new businesses locate downtown as a result of combining a restored courthouse with the Main Street approach to economic revitalization. The Main Street program in Texas celebrates its 37th anniversary this year. Since 1981, we've seen a $5.2 billion reinvestment in Main Street communities, with $215 million in fiscal year 2015 alone. Our 89 designated Main Street communities really do represent the best of Texas. For example, this is a great story, I think. The Buda Downtown Merchants Group, in partnership with the Buda Main Street program, presented a $2,300 check to the Victoria Main Street program to assist them with rebuilding efforts after Hurricane Harvey. Buda raised the money through commemorative ornament sales and donations received during the holidays to benefit a sister Texas Main Street community. And that is Texas. With your help, we can continue to bring economic revitalization to rural Texas communities through both of those programs, and the heritage tourists, of course, will follow. Our core work is historic preservation, and we do this across Texas by providing guidance and assistance to public and private property owners. But we are also property owners ourselves and are dedicated to using the state historic sites that we administer as examples of how to care for and interpret historic properties. Today, the THC has 22 state historic sites, from the McGoffin home in El Paso to Sabine Pass on the Louisiana border. Most recently, we added Mission Dolores, an early 1720s Spanish mission site on the Camino Real in San Augustine, and the historic French legation less than a mile from the Texas Capitol in Austin to our property portfolio. At these sites, we can pair our skilled preservation experts with education staff to preserve and highlight places like the home of Texas founding father Jose Antonio Navarro in San Antonio, which was recently designated a National Historic Landmark, the highest honor the federal government can bestow on a historic property. Or the birthplace of President Dwight Eisenhower, or the ruins of frontier forts like Fort Griffin, Fort Lancaster, and Fort McCavitt. And we don't just preserve these historic sites, we bring them back to life in ways that support local economies, draw visitors from around the world, and ensure that the places that tell Texas stories will never be lost. That's exactly what we're doing at San Felipe de Austin, the capital of Austin's colony just west of Houston, where we opened a new museum and visitor center on April 27th. It's a top-notch facility, and I hope you'll stop by sometime on your way between Austin and Houston. It's just a couple miles off I-10. We're hard at work identifying new ways to bring more visitors and generate revenue at our sites, including opportunities for corporate sponsorship. And to help us do this, we're working to enhance and cultivate volunteer friends organizations at each site who will fundraise and sponsor improvements in programming, helping to keep these sites in exceptional condition, ensuring robust programming for visitors, and help us to stretch the state's appropriations as far as we can. We hope to build on past appropriations and improve them so the THC can serve historic sites better, improving preservation, educational, and economic opportunities across our state. These are exciting times for Texas history and the Texas Historical Commission. Chairman Frullo and members, we appreciate your leadership as we approach the 2019 legislative session. For a relatively small investment in these programs, the Texas legislature can have a big impact on the economic vitality of our smaller communities and countless small businesses, restaurants, B&Bs, shops, and other tourism-related enterprises. Historic preservation is about much more than preserving the past. It's about real economic development and job creation and making certain that Texas retains its mystique, its unique history, and its culture for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf. I have one question. In
Yes.
visiting with the folks around here, they were talking about how I think recently they were designated a Main Street program. Just briefly, what kind of help and assistance Will the Historical Commission be providing, what can they do, or what can you do to help them reach those goals and have some of the success stories that we have heard you mention from around the state?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good question, because Brownsville was welcomed into the Main Street family, I think just 2 years ago. We had a great celebration here. The First Lady came down with us to help welcome the community into the program, and that was really meaningful, I think, for the community. We have some professionals on our staff in the Main Street program who have done economic development work all across the state, and they will consult with the folks here in Brownsville, help them to set up their volunteer committees, help them to connect with other Main Street communities that have similar projects or programs. One of the greatest things I think about the program and its success is that it's not a financial aid program. We don't write checks back out to the Main Street communities. We simply give them the kind of professional advice they need in order to improve their buildings, to connect them with tax credit programs that we administer, to assist them working with the county historical commissions if they're looking for markers or other ways to identify or designate their historic resources. And then also we have the Town Square Initiative, where we can send a small group of professionals in economic development, planning, and architecture into a community and focus their attention on a particular neighborhood or sometimes on a specific building to really help develop the economic analysis so that they can market that to potential purchasers. We have a great program, downtowntx.org. If you look that up on the internet, you'll find a website that connects, I think right now we have close to 40 communities listed. It takes all of their historical information from the kind of architectural surveys that have been done in the past and connect that to information from the local assessor's office and real estate offices. So if somebody's interested in opening a coffee shop in a historic downtown somewhere in Texas, they can go onto that website, look at Brownsville, see what properties are available, and then there are links that could take them directly to the real estate agent that has that property listed. So I'm not sure if Brownsville is currently participating, but that's a program we offer through the Main Street program.
Very good, thank you. Members, do you have any questions? All right, Mr. Wolf, thank you for your testimony. And
Thank you very much.
Colonel Jones, if you'll give us your name, your title, and who you represent. And again, want to thank you for the hospitality that the department showed us yesterday on the tours that we went on, and very impressive. And it's neat to see all the work that you and your organization do down here, and of course the fine folks that work for you.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much for that. Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Graham Jones. I'm the Division Director, Colonel for the Law Enforcement Division for Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. On behalf of Executive Director Carter Smith, I'm so happy to be here and talk to y'all this morning. You know, we really appreciate the opportunity, and obviously we appreciate the fact that you came down and spent some time with us yesterday. Here, in addition to myself, I have Major Chad Jones, Major Chris Davis, Major Kevin Davis, and their staff. And as Senator Lucio so eloquently spoke about earlier, you know, they represent headquarters, the field, and special operations. And so their goal is to work together in those groups to better serve the agency and better serve all Texans, and you know, to really work as one team. And that's what we do. So we're very, very proud of that. For over 120 years, Texas game wardens have been committed to protecting Texas' valuable and fragile natural resources, including recreational fishing, commercial fishing, oysters, which includes oysters, red snapper, shrimp, and crabs, birding and wildlife viewing, non-game and protected threatened species, invasive species, and the illegal wildlife trade. Also hunting, boating, and water safety. These activities are worth billions of dollars and provide thousands of jobs to the state economy. And they result obviously in tourism and recreation all across Texas, but also here in the Valley. As the state's population nears 30 million, those resources are now faced with an ever-increasing demand. As fully commissioned state peace officers, game wardens also provide valuable public safety to the people of Texas. Game wardens also lead in search and rescue efforts across the state. For example, over 300 Texas game wardens responded to Hurricane Harvey and rescued over 12,000 Texans by boat, vessel, and aircraft in impacted areas. And as a side note, yesterday, prior to our tour, game wardens responded to a kayaker in distress and were able to rescue that individual. Texas game wardens are responsible for enforcing the Texas Parks and Wildlife Code, all parks and wildlife regulations, and the Texas Penal Code. Game wardens fulfill these responsibilities through educating the public about various laws and regulations, preventing violations by conducting high visibility patrols, and apprehending and arresting violators. The Law Enforcement Division employs 551 Texas game wardens and 125 non-commissioned employees. We maintain a fleet of over 350 vessels and operate 28 field offices throughout the state. Game wardens engage with and educate the public, including tens of thousands of our youth during outreach activities. I'm going to show you some pictures in a little bit about that. We're very proud of that as well, because we all know that the youth is our future in many, many ways. Texas Parks and Wildlife Department's law enforcement border mission is to protect the state's diverse, valuable, and fragile natural resources, and to protect the citizens and others by providing water safety, search and rescue, general law enforcement, and public safety. We accomplish this mission by supporting and working with local, state, and federal law enforcement partner agencies and other Parks and Wildlife divisions, non-governmental organizations, landowners, and the public. Texas game wardens have patrolled the border region for more than a century. Game wardens currently patrol the Gulf of Mexico, Laguna Madre, the Rio Grande, Falcon Lake, Amistad Reservoir, rural ranch lands in South and West Texas, and communities along the border, protecting both our natural resources and our citizens. On a daily basis, Texas game wardens assist our partner law enforcement agencies, including the Texas Department of Public Safety, sheriff's departments, police departments, and the U.S. Border Patrol. In many cases, game wardens are a critical force multiplier to numerous state and federal agencies, as well as local law enforcement agencies. A little bit more detail into our border mission. Texas game wardens patrol the border region every day. Today, Texas game wardens assigned to counties along the border patrol as they do throughout the state. We also conduct surge operations based on historical trends and new information, and our tactical operations, made up of our scout team and maritime tactical operations group, work with local game wardens, Texas DPS, Border Patrol, U.S. Coast Guard, and other local, state, and federal agencies. We leverage maritime expertise and off-road capabilities, relationships within the community, including landowners and knowledge of waterways in rural areas, to reduce the likelihood of water-related fatalities by enforcing the Texas Water Safety Act. That's a big part of what we do. You know, our waterways, that's something that we are very proud of in patrolling across the state. We saw over the Memorial Day weekend, we responded to 19 boating accidents, multiple drownings. We had 8 individuals that drowned that weekend. Our dive team responded to help with recoveries, as did other game wardens, throughout the state. But that's something, water safety is a absolute core mission to what we do. We reduce the likelihood of water-related fatalities, as I said, including lakes, rivers, and bays, but along the Rio Grande, that's a big part of what we do along the Rio Grande as well. We protect the natural resources of Texas, which includes the enforcement of illegal commercial fishing by reducing gill netting and long lining from Mexican commercial fleets entering our waters. That includes Texas waters and U.S. waters. We're observing an increased number of incursions by commercial fishing vessels entering into Texas waters from Mexico. The vessels from Mexico are taking a large and ever-increasing number of reef fish, including red snapper, sharks primarily for their fins, and red drum. What we see is when they catch the sharks, they'll fin the sharks, they'll release the sharks still alive with no fins. Obviously, the shark will then die. Gill nets and long lines are illegal in Texas and in U.S. waters and indiscriminately kill marine life. We have recently documented dead dolphins, sea turtles, osprey, pelicans, and many fish species, including sailfish, king mackerel, shark, red drum, spotted sea trout, snook, and other fish in gill nets and long lines set by these fishing fleets from Mexico. This is, again, as we look at the demographics and the trends in Texas, fishing is big business in Texas. And one of the fastest growing demographics are women in fishing, specifically women in fly fishing. This is a fly fishing destination. And, when we remove nets from the Rio Grande at the mouth of Boca Chica or in the Gulf, or long lines in the Gulf, it's directly related to why people come here. They come here so they can catch fish. And that's a very clear, I think, line that shows the efforts and how important the work that the game wardens do relating to those long lines of gill nets. We have also seized thousands of pounds of marijuana on Mexican fishing fleets, as well as illegal fishing equipment, and in some instances, illegal fishing equipment and hundreds of pounds of marijuana on the same vessel. Once observed, these vessels attempt to evade capture and initiate the pursuit every time. Most of the time, the vessels outrun our vessels and return across the Mexican line. In the last 4 years, we have seized over 160 miles of long line and gill net containing thousands of fish and other marine life. I mean, think about that, 160 miles. That's a lot of illegal fishing equipment. U.S. recent fishery impact estimate by the U.S. Coast Guard determined there's an estimated 1,138 lancha incursions, those are the vessels that come from Mexico, into our waters for illegal fishing. The typical catch for one lancha is 800 to 1,500 pounds per trip. Larger lanchas are known to catch upwards of 3,000 pounds. For example, an approximate number is 1,525,000 pounds of red snapper poached from U.S. waters by Mexican launches in a 2-year period. Additionally, our border mission includes supporting landowners by reducing poaching, trespass, illegal dumping, fence cutting, vandalism, theft, and other property-related crimes. But we're also very proud that we extend, and our game wardens on a regular basis extend humanitarian support to persons, including women and children, needing immediate medical assistance and search and rescue, and our game wardens have provided emergency medical treatment to UDAs, including mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. We have rescued folks that were in the process of drowning, crossing the Rio Grande, and we are proud of that. We have maintained ongoing border surge operations since June 2014 in support of Operation Strong Safety and Operation Secure Texas. The Law Enforcement Division was appropriated $7 million in border funding during the last legislative session. These funds are being utilized for equipment, including repair and maintenance, training, fuel, game warden and state park police overtime, travel, lodging, and game warden salaries related to our border mission and our border operations. Maintaining the $7 million over the biennium in the division's base budget ensures our ongoing patrol and enforcement efforts along the Texas-Mexico border and helps to keep Texas game wardens safe, as well as other officers safe, because we respond and assist other agencies so often. In addition to daily land and water patrols, Texas game wardens have organized and conducted 30 border operations since September 1, 2017 that have resulted in the following: 1,325 citations and warnings, including Texas Parks and Wildlife Code and Penal Code. I think it's interesting here to also mention that our citation to warning ratio is pretty close to 50-50. I'm proud of that. I like the fact that our officers operate and utilize discretion. Not everyone needs a ticket, and we're proud of that. We can handle these things. There's a lot of times where you need a ticket, but there's sometimes you don't, and our folks know the difference. 147 arrests, including wildlife and fisheries-related crime, human smuggling, aggravated assault, and narcotics. 18,000 pounds of marijuana seized, 25,000 feet of illegal gill net and long line seized and removed from Texas waters. 38 search and rescue. I had 37, but after yesterday it was 38 search and rescue and emergency medical assists. And as far as our operational focuses along the border, as I said, includes oyster enforcement, water safety enforcement, trespassing, wildlife trafficking, poaching, including road hunting, human smuggling, and narcotics. I would like to thank all of the dedicated Texas game wardens who work extremely hard along the border and throughout the state. These men and women exemplify dedication and professionalism, and I cannot tell you how much they appreciate your presence and your interest. It means a lot that we're able to talk to you today and that you visited with some of them yesterday, so thank you so much for that. I just have a couple of pictures I'd be happy to show you regarding some of our activities along the border. This is just an example of the dolphins that are in some of the illegal fishing gear off the coast, right off of Boca Chica. That's the mouth of Boca Chica on the Rio Grande. Again, pulling gill net. That's some of the shark example of the pulling. That's our 65-footer, and we're pulling long line. There's a sea turtle that's in a long line, and then there's sharks and red snapper that were taken out of a Mexican fishing vessel. Snook, as you can see, And then there's a picture actually from, I believe that's Amistad on the left. Rio Grande on the right. That's out in the Gulf not far from where we're at right now. This was this winter. That's our Marine Tactical Operations Group there. You can see those are some pretty big snook in that net. Again, more efforts this past winter, checking a shrimp boat also. Some red snapper. And again, we work very, very closely. That's, I believe that's at the Coast Guard, one of the Coast Guard offices, so we work very, very closely with the Coast Guard. Those are just some piled up launches that we have seized. Some oystering going on in the mid-coast. You can see the numbers of vessels there. This was oystering at night, which is against the law, this last season. Of course, we run into, road hunting and traditional wildlife crime in the area as well. This was a case that Lynn County that was made several months ago. You can see the types of weapons that these individuals had. We're also very proud this last freeze, our game wardens worked to rescue the green sea turtles during the freeze. We rescued, along with other volunteers and other divisions within Parks and Wildlife, including coastal fisheries, between 35 and 4,000 green sea turtles. There's a few of them, and that's close to Matagorda Bay. Got a few turtles there on the boat. Makes you that kind of made us feel good right there. And then we took them to the coastal fisheries hatchery and warmed them up, let the freeze pass, and then released them. There's some marijuana in the area. That's kind of the way a lot of times what we'll run into. That's after it was seized, but we'll see it in the normally in the bundle form, whether it's in vehicle or whether it's in the vessels. That's the form that we see it in most of the time. Just boarding a shrimp boat. And as you could see yesterday when we were out in the Gulf, it can get a little tricky to do some of that activity. Working with the Coast Guard again. That's Port of Corpus Christi. That's our two 65-footers on each side, our 38-footer out front, and some safe boats behind. Some patrols in the Gulf. We have a very robust canine program. We have 10 canines units throughout the state. We do conservation law enforcement as far as conservation, wildlife detection, narcotics detection. We also do article search, and would include items such as firearms that have been thrown out maybe by a road hunter or called in to assist another agency in locating a firearm. We've actually found firearms that were used in murders as well. We found one that was a case was 2 years old, and our dog found the firearm in about 45 minutes. And we also do human remains as well, as far as trying to find deceased persons and drowning victims. We do a lot of outreach as well with our canines, and there we are on the left. We're training at Disaster City with our canines. We utilize our canines in hurricane and disaster response as well. That's our scout team working with DPS and CBP, and you can see where the bales of marijuana were hidden in deer blinds. You wouldn't want to walk up onto your deer stand and find that. We're laying in right there, and we're trying to observe. That actually was some folks that were laying some net, and we had game wardens that were observing and then reporting to game wardens and vessels, and we were able to apprehend those individuals. This was very recent as far as another situation that we run into working with other agencies, and those are, again, bales of marijuana. As I said, that we're so proud of, and I'm so proud personally of the work that our game wardens and other first responders did in Hurricane Harvey. This is an interesting picture because there's 4 generations of the same family in that boat. And it's very moving when you really think about that. Again, we're very active in the State Operations Center during disaster response. So we have, that side of things, and the support side, and then we have the operational side. As I mentioned, about 325 game wardens responded. We have a robust aviation program as well, and this was the first disaster. We've been training for about 2 years on you saw our helicopter yesterday. We actually did over 100 rescues by aerial hoist as well. and we partner with DPS on that. Going into some of the rescues there. That picture, we also returned the favor because Florida came and helped us out. Florida game wardens came and helped us out. We went to Florida. Wasn't quite as bad as we expected, but the interesting thing about that image is that image was shared on Facebook and Twitter, and after we did the math, that picture was shared almost 4 million times. Yeah. As I mentioned, outreach and education is something that we think is very important for the future of what we do. And, we do a lot of fishing and hunting and outdoor related events with schools, local schools and partnerships and other Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts and those types of groups. This is one that we did for retirement community. This was a program we did for Girls Outdoor Workshop just recently. And all of these events that we do, we're always keeping our eye out because we like to recruit young. We like to start recruiting young for future game wardens. This was a recruitment that we did with several other agencies, including Border Patrol and DPS, as far as a women in law enforcement program that we did recently. This is another example of we talked about the fact that our majors and their staff and our game wardens all work together for one goal. When Dallas lost multiple officers a few years ago, we actually, so they could go to their funerals, so that Dallas officers could attend the funerals of their fallen brothers, we went and filled in the gaps and actually patrolled the city of Dallas so they could attend their funerals and made partnerships with the Dallas Police Department. Very proud of that. And of course, there's Lone Star Law, TV show that we've gotten a lot of attention from, and a lot of future game wardens, I think, have started off watching Lone Star Law. That's all I have. I'll be happy to answer any questions, and I really appreciate your time.
I think one question, or one item I want to point out was when the department was up in Lubbock here recently, we heard testimony from small counties in that area, and I know that there's small counties throughout the state, that oftentimes you can be the main source of law enforcement in those counties, and definitely always a good backup source of law enforcement for those counties. We heard one case where they did not have a sheriff at that point, and so the game warden was basically the main source of law enforcement. And could you speak a little bit about that and what the role is there?
Absolutely. We believe in community-oriented policing, and that goes back to what I said about the warning ratio to citation ratio. We understand, and I think that for the most part, our game wardens understand the relationship with the community, with other law enforcement, with elected officials. And so, that's something that, we wake up in the morning, game wardens wake up in the morning, and we know what our mission is. Our mission is resource protection, conservation, law enforcement, and public safety. There's a balance there. So, when our game wardens are out on patrol, if there's a call, especially in a rural county where there's not much law enforcement, North Texas, West Texas, some parts of South Texas, there may not be another law enforcement officer on duty. Or even if there is one, a lot of times that officer needs backup. And we're proud of that. And that's something that we encourage our officers to do, is to support their fellow law enforcement officers, no matter what agency. We all work for the same brand as far as I'm concerned. No matter if you're state law enforcement, federal law enforcement, or local law enforcement, we're all in this together. I've always said law enforcement is a team sport, and I've said that somewhat jokingly, but it is. We have to, and we try to instill that in our cadets at the very early socialization time, and try to, throughout training, is to instill the fact that no one is an island. We all have to work together, and I think that a lot of times these communities, especially the rural communities, know who their Texas game wardens are, and they refer to them so often as they're my game warden. I loved when someone comes up and says, do you know Billy Lucio? He's my game warden. And I love that. That's what we want to try to portray. So, yeah, we're proud of that, Chairman, and I appreciate you mentioning that.
One other thing, I was lucky enough to go on the tours yesterday, and I didn't realize what an important role the game wardens play when you find these fishermen out there that are illegally catching fish. And we heard for the benefit of the folks that didn't make it, you would oftentimes come up to a boat where fish are sloshing around in the bottom with oil and gas. And those fish ultimately will get into the marketplace.
Yes.
Explain a little bit about what you do there and why it's important to keep those fish out of the marketplace because of where they're going to end up.
Well, that's a great point. And not only that, but Major Chad Jones and some of the folks from our criminal investigation division have been working also with fish actually being smuggled back from Mexico back into the United States. And there could be, mislabeling on those fish. It could say red snapper, but in reality it's not. Something that we're very concerned about and what we've just begun to notice is that oysters are being smuggled back into Texas from Mexico. We don't know where these oysters came from. Did they come from polluted waters? What kind of safe handling procedures? We cannot track where these oysters came from. I mean, eating an oyster from a polluted water could have dire consequences to the consumer. So, yeah, I mean, fish handling is hugely important, and that's why we work so hard. We had an operation in Houston very recently where our undercover unit and worked with the local district and region is targeting restaurants that were buying fish illegally from folks that didn't have the proper licenses. And we don't know where those fish came from. The consumer doesn't know where the fish came from. So again, that brings up some sort of the public safety component as well.
Members, are there any questions?
I have a quick question. First of all, Colonel, I want to tell you all are doing a tremendous job, fantastic job.
Thank you, sir.
And my daughter would sincerely love you all, especially if she would see those pictures of turtles. She prefers turtles over anything.
Yes,
If she
sir.
didn't have a dog, it would be a
It
turtle.
would be a turtle, right?
But my question is, and I hear it so many times, when you all seize fish or, if there's any poaching, what happens to that
Well,
fish?
it would depend sort of on if we know that the aquatic product is safe, and by what I mean by that, for example, if we were to catch a boat coming offshore that had red snapper over the limit, or let's say redfish over the limit on ice, okay, and they're in the bay and we seize those fish. What we would do with those fish is we would donate those as far as if we know that they're in edible condition, we would donate those to sort of the less fortunate is what we try to do. The same would go for an illegally taken deer. If we know that that the meat is good and our people know, then we'll donate that to the less fortunate.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Members, any?
I don't really have a question, just wanted to say again, thank you for the work you do, Colonel. Thank you for the work y'all do. We really appreciate everything y'all
Yes, sir.
are doing. Sorry we missed the tour yesterday, but really do appreciate what y'all do day in and day out. So,
Thank you so much for your support, sir. I appreciate that.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to echo Representative Kraus, but also want to ask you a question about what are the repercussions for illegally fishing?
Senator, so there's a couple of options.
That sounds very good.
I was waiting for an opportunity to say that, but it would depend sort of on the offense, but primarily it's a Class C misdemeanor. The fine ranges from $25 to $500 per offense. So if someone was over, say, 10 fish over the limit, technically every fish could be a separate offense. It would depend on how we would file that, depending on what, if we believed those individuals were selling illegally to a restaurant. Again, I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but there's a good chance we would file every available case. But there's also restitution as well, civil restitution on those, and that's per inch, and it depends on what type of fish they would be, so it varies. Red snapper can get pretty expensive. Other sailfish, those types of fish can get very, very expensive very quickly.
Let's just play this out. If, let's say you have Mexican nationals that are commercially illegally fishing
Yes.
in our waters, is that a Class C misdemeanor or is that something different?
It would depend, there could be also some illegal entry that we would refer that over to Customs and Border Patrol and let them process those individuals. But what we would do is we would file on them, and for state law, which would be Class C, they would be, remanded to the court, and the court would take it from there. A lot of times they would be released pretty quickly.
You see where I'm getting at this? I mean, if this is going to be a recurring issue and you have people that are capturing sharks and cutting off their fins and throwing them back in, is that a Class C too?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so there's really not that much risk for the criminal if they want to do this.
Yeah, and that's something we would like to discuss
Yeah.
further with you.
I'd like to do that.
And also, it depends on the offense. And I'll put it to you this way, we have caught the same fishermen from Mexico multiple times.
Yeah. Can I get your card too?
Absolutely, yes,
Thank
sir.
you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. When they sell illegally to a restaurant, is the restaurant liable?
Yes, sir,
And
they
do y'all-
can.
and-
Yes, sir, they can be.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
and that's part of your
Yes,
investigation
sir, it
as
is.
well? You don't pass that on?
Yes, sir, it is. Yeah.
Graham, thank you for your work and appreciate the opportunity to, to get to know from a close-up view of what you do. Y'all do a really good job, and you've got a broad swath in the entire state to manage, and the resources are vast. But I just appreciate the way in which you work with the legislature and represent the state. You do that with integrity and with passion and yet with respect. And so I very much appreciate your work, so thank you for what you do.
Thank you, sir, and we've enjoyed very much working with you and getting to know you, and I appreciate that also because I know you're a fisherman and your sons are fishermen, and we appreciate the way that you have supported not only the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, but also the Law Enforcement Division and our game wardens. It means more than you know, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Members, any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, Chair would like to call up our next witness, Trey Mendez from the Brownsville Preservation Society.
Mr. Chairman, we know that the senator's going to do a fine job because he's being sent over there housebroken.
Yeah, that's right. So,
I'm just an extra in Mondo Martinez's movie.
Yes.
Thank you.
morning, Trey.
Morning.
If you will give us your name, your title, and who you represent.
Sure, my name is Trey Mendez. I am the co-founder and vice president of the Brownsville Preservation Society. And we are a local nonprofit. It started in 2014 by a group of Brownsville residents and Brownsville imports, a bunch of people that just appreciated Brownsville's history and wanted to make an impact on preserving and promoting our historical resources. And I'm here in that capacity, just to discuss a little bit about our historical resources and its impact on economic development in general. As you all know, or as you may not know, Brownsville is considered to be the second most historic city in Texas. San Antonio is number one, and that's based upon how many historical buildings we have in our historical inventory. And anybody, I know, Chairman, you said you had just been to Brownsville for the first time yesterday, but anybody that drives down Brownsville and has the opportunity to look around notices right away we've got a bunch of historical buildings, and unfortunately a lot of them need some work. And thankfully, over the past several years, partly because of our initiatives, but mostly because of private investment, a lot of our buildings are being rehabilitated, and there is a movement in trying to get those buildings rehabilitated. We recently were part of a campaign. We got a small grant from the Brownsville Community Improvement Corporation to do a campaign called Preservation Matters. And that program really was more of an awareness campaign and kind of a promotional campaign to highlight our historic structures, our historic places. And the results of that small campaign were really interesting. We actually saw a huge increase in awareness on historic properties in general. What we were doing was we were highlighting historical properties, posting on our Facebook page, posting on social media, kind of photographing a property and telling the story of it, and a lot of people would chime in. It was really interesting to see a lot of the interest and impact on that. We also saw an impact, that kind of a ripple effect, if you will, on the amount of private citizens that kind of took interest, and you saw a lot of people starting to kind of work on their houses, kind of slowly repainting their houses or taking an interest in their properties. You saw a lot of new coats of paint, some new siding and things like that. It was really nice to see that, especially in the areas where we had properties that we were promoting or properties that we were actually highlighting. We also, I've spoken to several realtors, and they've all stated the same thing, which is that there's been a huge increase in people who are looking for historical properties to either purchase and live in or purchase and rehabilitate. So there's been quite a bit of interest generated through that as well. And what was most remarkable was that just the small economic impact that you saw on such a small grant. It was a $5,000 grant. You know, we put up various signs and we really did a lot of social media. But just the small amount of money created a huge economic impact. And I think you're seeing that in several places throughout the state. There's quite a bit of studies and a lot of data out there showing that, and I told the chairman this yesterday, the return on investment for every dollar spent in heritage tourism or heritage historical preservation results in well over $1 in economic impact once you actually start to quantify that. We're fortunate enough, Brownsville actually is a Main Street city, and we were designated as a Main Street city within the last few years, and the Main Street impact has been huge as well. You've seen a lot of interest generated in our downtown. There's quite a bit of historical buildings that have been rehabilitated in our downtown area, and you're starting to see an influx of business owners that are starting to come to our downtown, and a lot of interest. I have a historic building not too far from here that's generated quite a bit of interest. We have a couple of commercial spaces, and there's been a lot of people that are starting to consider coming downtown. And what I'm really liking is that you see a lot of small business that's starting to come into our downtown. You know, we could use anchors certainly, but I think the fact that at this point the real estate prices are a lot cheaper downtown. Some of the rental prices are a lot cheaper per square foot. I think you see a lot of people that are willing to come down, and they see a lot of interest that's being generated, so they're starting to really have interest, and you're starting to see a real change in our downtown. One thing I have stated, and one thing that I really would hope that your committee does look at, is that Main Street, while it is very useful with design and other information, it is not very useful on, I guess you could say, the front end. And there's a lot of initiatives throughout the state that provide incentives on the back end. For example, if somebody rehabilitates a property, they can be entitled to certain tax credits or certain tax benefits. But that's, again, on the back end of this. You have to actually initiate the project. You have to complete the project, follow through, and then you can receive some sort of benefit from that. What I'd like to see, and what I think would be very beneficial, is maybe having some sort of front-end impact or some front-end resources you could allocate to individuals, whether that, I'd really like to see the focus on small business particularly. I think that that's really going to be the economic driver, not just for our city, but for a lot of the Main Street cities. And I think that if Main Street had the ability, maybe throughout the state, to have the benefit of some additional resources to educate small business owners and to maybe provide some sort of monies on the front end. I'm not saying just give the money away. What I think you have to have is some sort of buy-in. If you have some sort of buy-in that's tied to some sort of economic benefit for the business owner, the property owner, I think you're going to see a lot shorter track to that economic development in some of these smaller cities. And particularly, I think a lot of the Main Street cities seem to share a lot of same characteristics. They're smaller cities. They have a lot of historical infrastructure. They need some economic help. They may have the historical resources, but they don't necessarily have the economic resources to turn things around right away. And I think that small, like I said, the small investment we saw in our preservation campaign had a huge impact. I think the same thing would be the case if you considered maybe allocating some more resources to Main Street, or some sort of additional grant monies for business owners. Like I said, have some sort of nugget, have some sort of buy-in from the business owner, maybe a match. But I think something like that would be very beneficial to generating small business in some of these smaller communities that have the historical buildings, the historical places, just not necessarily the monies to get it all done. I have a lot more to say, but that's kind of the short part of it. One thing I would like to point out also, I did provide each of y'all with the City of Brownsville Heritage Plan, and that includes a lot of our historical buildings and historical homes. As of now, and all of the properties that are on that list that are owned by that are owned by private individuals, I think the number's right around 100 that are on that list that are owned by private individuals. You've got over 50 that are owned by tax-exempt entities such as school districts or the city itself. About 150 on that list, and some of those properties do receive tax credits or tax benefits from that. But that's not the total of our inventory. We've got plenty more, a lot of historical buildings that are not on that list that just have not made an effort to qualify for that. But I just provided that to you so you can kind of see some of the buildings that we have and some of our jewels.
Very good. Thank you for your testimony, members. Are there any questions? I think you got great opportunities going on, and encourage you to keep working on them, and it's neat to see what all you have done.
I'll keep doing my part.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate the testimony. The Chair would like to call up the next witness, Gilberto Salinas, Interim Executive Director for the Greater Brownsville Incentives Corporation. And if you'll give us your name, title, and who you represent. Good morning.
Morning. Gilberto Salinas, I'm with the Interim Executive Director with the Greater Brownsville Incentives Corporation. That's the economic development arm for the city of Brownsville. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, just last week Brownsville was ranked in the top 10 list and of the most improved and most prosperous cities in the United States, which points to how our city has come a long way and is now positioned itself for the future economic growth and sustainability of this region and really in the state of Texas. That leads me into three major projects that are sustaining all of this progress that we have in this area, that are contributing to our successes by creating jobs, capital investments, and as a rewarded spin-off activity in the travel and tourism sector. I'll start with the South Texas launch site by SpaceX. And just a disclaimer, I don't represent Space Exploration Technologies. I work for the Economic Development Group, which I advocate for the community. SpaceX has prepped the ground for their planned launch site where they plan to be launching their signature rocket, which is a Falcon 9 rocket, and eventually the Falcon Heavy rocket, as it's stated in the environmental study, from our coast at Boca Chica Beach. It's reported that they'll be planning to launch in 2019. This will be very similar to what you would see at Cape Canaveral as far as the actual structures that you have out there for the launches, both for SpaceX as well as for NASA. There's three components to the project. The actual launch site, that's where the rocket takes off from. So that's going to be literally 1,000 feet away from the surf at the Boca Chica Beach, which is 3 miles north of the mouth of the Rio Grande and 5 miles south from the southern tip of South Padre Island. Then you have the actual command center, which is 2 miles away from the launch site. The command center is very similar to what you would see in Houston, which is, I don't do it any service when I say it's a building where all the rocket scientists are at. They push a button and the rocket takes off. So we're going to have that component here as well for the actual launch site. And then adjacent to that is a Stargate facility, which is a ground tracking station. And that is a public-private partnership between our entity as well as the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley and SpaceX. And that's where they're going to have, whenever SpaceX is not using that facility, students will be working out of there and using it to track vehicles once they're traveling in space. When SpaceX launches an actual rocket and their capsule into space, they'll be using it as well. So we're going to have those three components here. When they do start launching, we know that Brownsville, Cameron County, and for that matter, the Rio Grande Valley, South Texas, is going to get a boon in tourism from rocket watchers, not to be confused with space tourism. Space tourism is people actually going into space. These would be rocket watchers, people coming in, flying, driving down to view the rocket launches. SpaceX eventually will be at a point where they'll be launching one rocket per month. Using launches in Florida, our economic development counterparts in that state and the data that they have, for every, the keyword unmanned launch, which is every non-space shuttle launch in Florida, they get 40,000 visitors. Just in February, SpaceX had the historic launch of the Falcon Heavy, which is a huge, it's actually now the fastest rocket in the history of the world, really, at Cape Canaveral, and it attracted 100,000 visitors, according to their Florida tourism estimates, with an impact in the tens of millions of dollars. In South Texas, the estimates that we have as far as visitors per rocket launch, once they start launching, is at about 15,000 to 20,000 per launch. We believe we're being conservative, especially for the first launches. When rocket watchers come into community, let's just say, is in Florida. They usually stay for a period of 2 to 3 days for what turns out to be a 3-minute launch. Each launch here with the 15 to 20,000 visitors that we're expecting will have an impact of $40 to $50 million in Brownsville proper, not including the activity that they'll be seeing in South Padre Island, Port Isabel, and some other surrounding communities. So the space business soon will be an economic engine for South Texas in many different ways, and tourism is one of those long-reaching ripple effects as a result of the economic development from this project. Now I'm going to switch gears and get onto the second project that's also generating tourism. So the federal government is nearing completion of a U.S. consulate facility in Matamoros, which is literally a stone's throw away from here. The operation will be processing between 6,000 to 9,000 visas per week. The facility is going to rival the largest U.S. consulate facility on the U.S.-Mexico border, and that's the one in Ciudad Juarez. They're processing upwards of 8,000 to 9,000 visas per week. These are people that are going to be coming in from all over the country, from different nationalities, different walks of life. Typically, visas take between 3 to 4 days to process. Similar to the process in Ciudad Juarez, the visa holders end up staying on both the Mexican and the U.S. side as they're waiting for their visas. They can't leave until they get their visa. So it's also going to be a huge tourism boom for this area as they wait, as these people are going to be in our community waiting. And these visitors are going to be driving and flying into Brownsville to get their visas processed on the Mexican side. Again, another form of tourism that our region did not previously had. And then on the final leg of the three-leg stool is construction by way of different jobs that we're seeing. It's an influx of construction-related jobs for the next 3 to 5 years. We're at the different stages of economic development process, of the recruitment process of different companies. I'll start with the LNG plants. I think some of you all toured the Port of Brownsville. Those LNG plants, these are multi-billion-dollar operations. They're between $6 billion to $11 billion in capital investment. Direct employment's about 500 people, but on the construction side, each one of these plants could employ upwards of 2,000 to 3,000 construction workers over a 5-year period. We just had one of the LNG plants in our office last month, and they started asking about, well, what are some of the service providers that you have, construction workers, vendors, and what have you. So we started providing the lists, and then they started honing in on the construction workers. So, we started saying, well, we can pull in a few hundred here, a few hundred there. They said, no, we need 3,000 come January. So it's coming our way. And these are workers that end up staying, not so temporary if it's for 5 years. A steel mill, there's a $1.6 billion in capital investment. It's a huge steel operation that has announced that they have leased property at the Port of Brownsville. Does not necessarily mean that they're coming. It just means that they're already starting their environmentals, very similar to the LNG plants. However, once they get through the environmental process, which is obviously rigorous and expensive, chances are that they'll commit. So they're starting on that, and that's also about 500 to 700 direct jobs. But again, we're looking at the construction phase. 2 years from now, they're going to need 1,000 to 2,000 construction workers for the next 3 years to build a plant. The SpaceX project, that one's getting ready. They've moved dirt, but now they're getting ready to pour concrete here. They're also going to require construction workers very soon. Greyhound Coach Bus Lines just announced that they're going to have a facility here in Brownsville where they're going to be refurbishing and doing final assembly on their entire North American fleet. Great project, and again, it's going to require construction jobs to get them up and running here in the next few months. And then the new airport terminal, that one's also going to be breaking ground this fall. And again, direct employment, not so many jobs, but on the construction for the next 2 years, 2 to 3 years, we're going to see several hundred construction jobs there. So as you can see, everything's converging at the same time. So if you do the math, we're already at about between 6,000 to 7,000 construction jobs over the next few years that we're going to see. And at the moment, we don't have enough housing or hotel rooms to accommodate a lot of these workers that will be coming into the area, in addition to the ones that live here. So in all three sectors combined, we're expecting a boom in the business travel, extended stay travel because of the construction workers, and then of course on the tourism side. So as you can see, 5 years ago, when we started having success with the recruitment of some of these companies of industry and growth in primary jobs, and I will say that it has been a lot of it is due to the help of incentives at the state level, as well as support at the state level for local projects. It's today that we're now starting to see the rewards from these outer bands of this ripple effect, where investment and growth in the private sector is now, we're now seeing in the next few years, outside of the direct jobs, we're seeing the impact on the tourism side. Thank you.
It sounds like you have some pretty exciting projects going on. Congratulations.
We're busy.
Very good. Members, any questions? Oh,
So you give a lot of the credit, the fact that y'all are doing so much growth in top 10 in the country is incredible. And I was going to ask, what spurred that on or what brought that on? You're saying that you think a lot of the incentives is what brought this on, or was it something else and the incentives just kind of helped?
The incentives, for the most part, that's kind of like the cherry on top. That helps you close a deal. It's not the main driver when you're trying to work these projects and close a project. But if incentives are not in play, you might as well start ceding that project over to another state. So that's it's a fact. I mean, we've seen that happen. So we still need those programs. For instance, the SpaceX project, I mean, we tapped into the Spaceport Trust Fund, Texas Enterprise Fund, and the then Emerging Technology Fund. Some of these other projects, and then that's in addition to the bigger bulk of the incentives programs tend to be at the local level. That's why I say the state is usually the cherry on top. Your Economic Development Division, which also has film tourism under it with Brian Daniel. It starts with them, them just being able to sometimes just make a phone call to a company on our behalf goes a long way. So sometimes it's not just about the incentives. So we've, a lot of the success goes to the leadership at the local level, working with our regional partners, and then also reaching out to the state and then seeing them being extremely supportive with that. So some of these projects that I mentioned were leads that came through the state of Texas. And we jumped on them.
Yeah, well done.
Wayne?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, thank you. Gilberto, thank you for your update. We had a little discussion last night about collaboration, with the school system and with the education side of, in the past we've had an inordinate focus on, a four-year education post-high school. And so I'm wondering if, looking at the projects that you have in the pipeline of what's coming forward here, is there a program or some type of a collaboration with the school that will allow the development of a skilled workforce here to be able to meet the needs of the projects that are coming forward?
That's a good question, because, and coming back to what you were asking as well, now with the success that we're seeing, our biggest challenge, and it's not just us, but it's statewide, is human capital, and is looking for that middle skill set. We did a great job over the last 10 years of graduating a lot of students with four-year degrees, but now that we're seeing this activity, these projects, and they're here, they're coming. I'll give you an example. We have an Italian manufacturing firm, advanced manufacturing firm, and whenever you can say advanced manufacturing, that's a buzzword for your communities doing pretty well. It's a CNC machining operation, and they've got robotics in there and what have you. They're at about 60 employees, and they are a tier 1 provider for the big three up in the Detroit area. They're having a hard time trying to find that skill set. They're bringing in people actually from outside of the state, because even within Texas, we can't find enough machinists. So as a result of that, we've gone back to the school districts. We've got 3 different school districts that serve our area, so we've met with all 3 of them, as well as our community college, to start developing those programs to develop that pipeline for them. So we're behind in the sense that once we started hitting on these projects, the human capital was there, but the skill set not necessarily. So now we're addressing that, we're working on that. And again, this is a challenge that you see throughout the state.
Thank you.
Members, any other questions? All right. Gilberto, thank you for your testimony. Appreciate it.
Thank
Good
you.
luck.
Thank you.
Now the chair would like to move on to charge one and discuss the Hurricane Harvey's impact on travel and tourism recommendations for mitigating future disasters. It's also important, or we want you to note that we'll also have additional hearing discussion on this in Austin on July 18th. And our first witness will be David Teal, CEO of the Texas Travel Industry Association and Texas Commercial Airports Association. And David, I think that we want to congratulate you on your way up here. Understand that you're only going to be at the helm for a few more weeks, and then you're going to be leaving us. Is that correct?
Well, I'll be around for a while yet.
You'll
There's
be
still
around
lots
for a
to
while?
do and, good work on behalf of the industry to get done, but I will be leaving both of these positions at the end of the year.
At the end of the year?
Yes, end of the
Okay.
year. So I'm not going anywhere just yet.
And then you've worked under what, Governor Bush,
Started under the Bush administration. Yes, sir. Been around for a while.
Perry, and
Worked under Governor Perry, yes.
we'll see a little bit between now and then, but of course, want to use this opportunity to wish you the best.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Really appreciate it. Good morning to you and committee members. I am David Teal. I'm testifying today as President and CEO of the Texas Travel Industry Association and Executive Director of the Texas Commercial Airports Association. Both organizations are truly appreciative to be given the opportunity to update you on the impacts of and recovery from Hurricane Harvey. When first approached about this testimony, it's kind of a daunting task because it's like, where do you begin and where do you end? Harvey was such a widespread event for the state. It impacted virtually every sector of the travel and tourism industries in Texas. Obviously, however, businesses, communities, and workers in the Gulf Coast were most directly and most profoundly impacted. So that's where I'd like to focus my comments today. Harvey wreaked horrible damage on some communities while sparing others nearby. For example, while Harvey decimated tourism-dependent communities such as Rockport, Fulton, and Port Aransas, neighboring Corpus Christi was spared. In the coastal Bend area, Harvey's fierce destruction was driven by wind, yet as the storm moved more inland and eastward, it became a historic rain event, flooding cities such as Houston and Beaumont, interrupting travel to those in other areas. Some tourism communities, such as Galveston, Corpus Christi, and even South Padre Island, were relatively or even totally unscathed, yet the impacts of Harvey were felt in these communities because of the perceptions that the entire Texas Gulf Coast was devastated. Many travelers, in fact, who had made plans to visit South Padre Island over the Labor Day weekend canceled their hotel reservations because the images that they saw in the media gave the perception that the entire Texas coast, South Padre included, was ravaged by Harvey, even though the hurricane was some 200 miles up the coastline. The Texas State Aquarium in Corpus Christi was essentially undamaged by Harvey. Yet, post-Harvey, the aquarium has reported losing $1 million in operational revenue due to lost visitation because consumers have had the perception that Corpus Christi had been destroyed. Travel and tourism in some Harvey-hit communities is essentially back. In Houston, only 10% of the city was actually flooded. That's not to understate the severity of flood damage done there, but the travel and tourism infrastructure was relatively unharmed. Industry representatives there report that only 3 hotels were closed, and they expect all 3 to be back online within the next 60 days. There was some flooding damage to city-owned facilities in the theater district. However, fortunately, the city has enough funds in reserve to cover most of those repair costs. The remainder will come through FEMA. Even though travel activity to Houston post-Harvey has rebounded, local travel industry officials there say they are still fighting consumer perceptions that the city is closed for travel and tourism. The Houston airport system, including Bush and Hobby airports, closed for about a week due to extreme flooding. The airports suffered some physical damage to landing areas, runways, and taxiways, as well as damage to instrument landing systems. There is not yet a final cost number available, but officials there are estimating a total of somewhere between $10 million and $15 million for damage and business interruption. 11,000 commercial flights were canceled that week at the Houston airports. Since Houston serves as a hub airport system, directing flights to smaller airports across the state, the impacts of interrupted and canceled flights significantly impacted smaller Texas airports. For example, the Corpus Christi airport could have opened the day after Harvey hit. But because Houston was closed and so much of the inbound traffic into Corpus Christi comes through Houston, Corpus Christi lost a week's worth of flights also. Perhaps the most recovery-challenged tourism economies are in the smaller tourism-dependent communities such as Rockport, Fulton, and Port Aransas. They were truly pummeled by Harvey. The Corpus Christi Regional Economic Development Corporation estimates that 1,800 leisure and hospitality jobs have been lost in the Corpus metro area. Undoubtedly, many, if not most of those, were in Rockport, Fulton, and Port Aransas. As of today, local officials estimate 80% of businesses in Rockport, Fulton are back in operation. That is truly miraculous. They expect 50% of their hotel rooms will be back online by midsummer. However, full recovery of the business community is not expected to occur until March of 2019. In Port Aransas, only 1/3 of their businesses were open this spring, and less than 50% of their lodging is back online. It is expected full business recovery there will not happen until 2020. The struggle to reopen has not been easy. Fully 1/2 of the businesses that are open in Rockport Fulton had to use their own savings to reopen because insurance claims were processed so slow or because the payments made were far less than expected. A lot of business owners didn't even know that you could appeal an insurance company payment. Many of the businesses that are open are not at pre-Harvey levels of sales, which means sales and use tax and other tax revenues are lagging behind as well. Overall, peak season events such as spring break, which are commonly used as an indicator, a leading indicator for business, spring break was down in attendance. There is a wary, cautious eye on what the summer is going to look like for these communities. Access to capital, displaced workers, workforce availability, and training have all presented challenges for these communities. But across the board, whether it's Rockport, Fulton, Houston, Galveston, all of these communities tell us they need help in getting the word out to consumers that Texas is open for tourists. Some of these businesses and communities obviously don't have the resources now to promote themselves. The need for a fully funded state tourism marketing and advertising program has never been greater than it is today. We encourage the legislature to make that a priority in the upcoming legislative session. Another priority need for these communities is a successful summer. Summer makes or breaks many of these communities. With schools starting earlier and earlier in August, Texas families, the very backbone of summer travel, need a full 3 months available to them to travel as families to these communities. These are tourism-dependent communities. Without a successful summer, the future is bleak. We encourage the legislature to revisit reestablishing a uniform school start date so these tourism communities and others across the state have a better chance to recover. There are other opportunities now, as some of the dust has settled, that we are beginning to see that the legislature can consider to help the travel and tourism industry better handle and recover from these types of devastating weather events in the future, such as education and training for communities and businesses to be better prepared for and to better respond to such events. It's ironic to think, but it had been a long time since a hurricane had hit the Corpus Christi area. They've hit here pretty frequently, up the coast pretty frequently, but that area had not had a hurricane in 25 years or more, as I recall. People had forgotten what you had to do to prepare and what you had to do to deal with those. An education and training program there for businesses and communities would be very useful to the communities. Infrastructure improvements to make communities more flood resistant. Surges of seawater into freshwater areas has done extensive damage, particularly in areas like Beaumont, to vegetation and wildlife. And guidelines for insurance companies to help them process claims in a more efficient and timely manner. One of the biggest challenges that we found that many of the businesses in our sector had post-Harvey was, take for example TWIA, not a criticism, but even they were undermanned just because of the scope of the tragedy that we were looking at. So it took a long time for claims to be processed, delayed the process of trying to get these businesses back online. So any kind of guidelines that we could look at and suggest that insurance companies adopt would be very useful to our industry. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my testimony. I'm happy to try to answer any questions anyone may have.
Thank you, members. Any questions? It's, I hope those hurricanes continue to be infrequent.
The biggest thing we can all do for these coastal communities is to look that way, look up the coastline, and all blow together and keep the hurricanes off somewhere else. That's the biggest thing we can do. We don't need another one anytime soon.
I think Wayne has a question.
Yeah, just wanted to thank you, Mr. Chairman. David, listen to your testimony. People don't realize that, 10% of Houston was flooded, and even though 10% is a significant portion of that, and it is devastating. And then you talk about, the aquarium and anything, South Padre,
Yes.
Galveston basically unscathed during this, and people actually, we saw, actual reverse evacuation. People evacuated to Galveston.
Yes.
And because we sat in the middle of Houston and Beaumont and saw that. So perception's reality here. People thought the entire Texas coast had been devastated, and so it was that perception, and with what goes on with the news media and social media, it's difficult to overcome that and help people understand that while the coast and portions of the coast are suffering tremendous loss. I don't want to minimize that, but the rest of the state's open and open for business, and not everybody's impacted. And so it's part of the challenge of what we do, Mr. Chairman, of being in the legislature and trying to find ways to minimize that and to help business to stay in business.
Absolutely, and to your point, a couple of things. At one point during Harvey, you may have seen the photograph that was supposedly taken at Hobby Airport with the Southwest Airlines plane underwater. That was legitimately fake news. That never happened, okay? So, everybody at the airports are trying to dispel that, all right? And those are the kinds of things that we found we had to deal with. The tourism folks in Houston, they turn on the TV and that's all you would see was the surging water and the floods. And yet, so they put a camera on the green space right outside the George R. Brown Convention Center where it's dry and people are out walking and they're enjoying the day. So I mean, there's so many mixed messages that were out there, and the perceptions. We are in an industry where perception is reality. And if we don't control the perception, then it's somebody else's reality.
That's right. Members, any other questions? David, thank you again, and thank you for all you've done for tourism.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Same for you.
Next, the chair would like to call up Bryant Walker, Director of Brownsville South Padre Island International Airport. You'll give us your name, title, and who you represent.
Okay. My name is Bryant Walker. I'm the airport director for the Brownsville South Padre Island Airport, representing the city of Brownsville today. I think I'm going to give you the micro view of what Mr. Teal was just discussing. When Hurricane Harvey hit, we actually had a nice sunny day here in Brownsville. It was a Chamber of Commerce day, in fact. But since we are a hub and spoke system in the aviation industry, and with Houston being our hub, we're a spoke, we lost all air service. We do serve both Dallas and Houston airports. However, we don't have, given the uncertainty of the direction of the hurricane and the impact that it would have, both Dallas and Houston suspended service to the Brownsville area. That pretty much cut off the community for air service or being able to get into the national airspace system. The impact to the airport was certainly all the fees, fuel sales, concessions, everything else that the airport generally generates for an entire week period. We lost certainly the connectivity. We lost everything else. American Airlines did reconnect within 2 days, but United took a whole week. This cost the airport directly about $40,000 in airport revenue itself. In preparation, like was mentioned, we're used to hurricanes down here, so we actually prepared for the hurricane, and we expended some $30,000 just for that. Our budget's not the same as Houston is, so we have, this is a big impact to the airport itself. To counter that perception issue, we do have air service, so we throw money at air service as well. The cost for that annually is about $80,000, so we have to continue that effort so that we can rebuild the service for any that's lost. When somebody thinks that they, when they cancel their vacation plans, as Mr. Teal pointed out, we've got to rebuild the perception that it's a safe area, that it was not impacted by a hurricane, and that it's ready for their plans. If we had had a direct landfall in this area, it would have impacted the airport in numerous ways. Flooding would be obvious, but then we would have also lost power. We would have lost power to our airfield as well as our navigational aids, as Houston did. It would have shut down the airport for an extended period of time. We would have perimeter issues with the current state of our perimeter system at the airport. And we would have possibly had damage to our control tower. All this would have been something that would have been difficult to actually plan for or mitigate against. What we think, what we expect and what we're doing right now is actually completing a master plan for the airport, including the new terminal that was mentioned a couple of times. We're also planning our drainage and grading per the FAA's requirements to keep the airfield clear of water. And all this also costs money. We have a plan from 1997 for drainage and flooding. That plan's expired. The FAA won't accept it for funding any longer, so we have to do a new plan for $25,000. And our engineer has estimates for mitigating flooding at the airport. It's about $1.5 million. Other disasters that the airport's had is just severe rainfall. It doesn't take a hurricane here to actually impact the airport operations. Just rainfall alone will do it. And again, that goes back to grading and drainage for the airport, which we need to mitigate for. Other projects that would help the airport with the connectivity would be extending our runway, which new FAA reporting requirements for runway conditions for operational aircraft is to essentially shorten the runway for any aircraft given any sort of contamination on the runway. That requires us to counter that, we need to actually extend the runway. The cost for the estimations right now for us to extend our primary runway is $82 million. So we're pursuing
What was
the
that
FAA.
number, 18?
I'm sorry?
18 or 8?
$82 million for the runway extension.
And how long is the extension, if you don't mind? I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. How long
The
is
actual, the feet?
Yes, sir.
We would be extending about 2,600 feet
To a total of
to a total of 10,000 feet.
10,000.
Which at sea level, it's 10,000 feet would accommodate then about 98% of the aircraft fleet. Right now, we accommodate about 85 to 88% of the aircraft fleet with the existing runway, without contamination on it. So if we want to maintain that connectivity, we definitely need to extend it. And additionally, the project's been put forward to connect the airport to the seaport with about 7 miles of rail, and that project's about $27 million. And so we're actually pursuing with that with the MPO. We have a rail study, and we've been including right-of-ways on different road projects to connect the airport to the seaport. I think that's that's about all of it. Do you have any questions?
Members, any questions? Nope.
All right,
Appreciate your testimony. Thank you.
Thank you.
The chair would like to call up Susan Guthrie, city manager for the city of South Padre Island, and Dr. Jude Benavides, associate professor of hydrology and environmental sciences at UT Rio Grande Valley. And Susan, you could get started. Thank you for testifying today. If you'll give us your name, your title, and who you represent.
Thank you, Chairman and Committee. I'm Susan Guthrie. I'm the City Manager for the City of South Padre Island. As you know, South Padre Island is a barrier island. The actual city is about 5.5 miles long and only half a mile wide. We are a barrier island, and so consequently are the first line of defense for the Rio Grande Valley against hurricanes that are approaching. And we take that job very seriously. And we've spent the last couple of decades building our continuous dune system in preparation for storms and to mitigate any damage. At this time, we have over $2.6 billion of assessed property values on the island in the city limits, which protects the city of Brownsville's $7+ billion of economic investment in terms of assessed property values. In anticipation of Hurricane Harvey, many models showed it coming directly towards our area. We spent over a week preparing. We stood up in partnership with the Cameron County Emergency Services. We stood up our Emergency Operations Center. We did a soft evacuation of all high occupancy vehicles off of the island. We did significant beach preparations, meaning that anywhere we had a break in our continuous dune system, we trucked in sand to try to mitigate any storm surge that would come onto the island. We also did a survey of our beach so that we would know what damage occurred as a result of the storm. It's hard for me to get up and talk about the impacts to our island because of the impacts that other communities actually felt when the storm hit them. And our prayers continue to be with our fellow Texans who were significantly impacted. But we did have impacts, and I'm here to share those with you today because they're interesting and that we had to learn from these. And as soon as Harvey went by, and some of the estimations were as close as 50 miles from South Padre Island, and it would have been completely devastating had that storm hit South Padre Island. But as it went by, of course, there was a great sense of relief as we prayed for our fellow Texans. But almost immediately, we felt the impacts, and that is the tourists did not come. And if you've been to South Padre Island, you know that is all we have for our economy is tourism. That is it. It's not like we turn the machines back on in the factory and things start going again. That's it. If we don't have tourism, we have no economy whatsoever. So when the tourism did not resume as we expected it to, because we knew we hadn't been hit, it took a little bit of time for us to realize that the rest of the country did not realize that we had not been hit. Then we faced really a kind of a challenge because, it's pretty insensitive to start putting out commercials saying, hey, we didn't get hit, come here instead. So we really had to think through, how do we do this in a way that's sensitive to those who were hit, but preserved our economy and our, the only thing that we have to bring in tourism dollars. I can tell you what the impact was. We were on record pace for the city of South Padre Island for our tourism. Over August through October, we had a loss of $393,000 in hotel occupancy tax. This equates to about $36 million in hotel revenues, so that's not even economic impact. That's just hotel revenues for South Padre Island, August through October, and those were lost. We then, as soon as we realized what was happening, we did 3 separate spends, $100,000, $100,000, and $300,000, so $500,000 total in extra media buy to get the word out that yes, we had not been impacted and we were open for business. This worked. You know, we started seeing an upswing. We're starting to recover. We're still behind pace of last year, but we're recovering. But it was a lot of lessons learned for us about having those kind of messages in the bag so that we can employ them very quickly. And that's something that I think is that we could share with the state, of being able to quickly respond of what areas were not impacted, particularly as we turn the corner of December and all the people who come from other states, the winter visitors, you know, not understanding and seeing this imagery that we weren't impacted and that they could still come, and that if they couldn't go to the community they normally go to, there were adjacent communities that they could visit. I think some of the things that we've learned over the last several months because of the tragedy was we've invested a lot of money in technology to be able to measure the impacts of our marketing. You know, we spend about $2.1 million a year in our media buy, and we have to know that every one of those dollars is going to be effective and move the dial. So there are tools that we've, as a community, now bought into, things like VisaView, that show you where everybody who comes to our community and spends money on a Visa card, where did they come from? How did they get here? How much money are they spending? Are they visiting Sea Turtle Inc.? Are they visiting the Birding Center? What kind of place are they staying at? So we've now subscribed to that. Another tool that we're using is a product called Arrivalist, which uses pixels embedded in digital ads to let you know, did that ad work? Did that person ever end up on our island or not? And I'm sharing these with you because, you know, we really believe in the value of the state's marketing for tourism, but we also believe there are tools that can be broadly used to measure the effectiveness and that can be shared with cities so that what we're spending our money on is effective and really is bringing tourists to our community and to the state. So, you know, the big things that I would ask of you is to look at continuing funding tourism marketing, and also to continue funding beneficial use of dredged material to construct dunes and to do stop erosion on the beaches, because those are the things that most impact our island and our local economy. I'm happy to answer any questions.
We saw the, and thank you for your testimony, we saw the McFarland out there, I think,
Yes.
Dredging. That's a pretty impressive operation. Members, any questions?
No, thank you. That's
All
great
right, well,
information.
thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Dr. Benavides, want to talk to us about hydrology.
All right, and last but not least.
If you'll give us your name, title, and who you represent.
Absolutely, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Jude Benavides. I'm an associate professor of hydrology and environmental sciences at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, specifically here on the Brownsville campus. I'm here speaking as an expert in hydrology and water resources and flooding, not on behalf of the university itself. Honorable Chairman Frullo and committee members, thank you for the opportunity to present a few thoughts with you today. When I was asked to speak about this, I wasn't informed that we would have the PowerPoint option, but I think that's good for everyone because you give a professor PowerPoint, it'll be an hour-long talk, and there'll be a quiz and an exam. So I'll keep my comments to about 5 minutes. Hurricanes are one of the many types of natural disasters that befall the built and natural environment. A discussion of this particular type of disaster is obviously pertinent due to the recent occurrence of Hurricane Harvey, and several people have spoken about that today. But it's also pertinent in light of the just recent passing of the 50th anniversary of Hurricane Beulah, the powerful Category 5 hurricane that impacted Brownsville, South and Central Texas and northeastern Mexico in September of 1967. This was a direct strike. It was thought to be a Category 3 hurricane at the time, but it actually had bent the anemometer, the wind sensor at the airport over, and so we didn't get a direct reading then, and it was posthumously, and I didn't know that was possible until I started studying hurricanes, awarded a Category 5 after the fact. These major storms are devastating examples, along with the recent impacts in Puerto Rico, of the power of nature and the damage to life and property that can befall coastal communities in their path. But they also affect communities indirectly as well, as you've heard by many of my many of the previous speakers. Scientists in the U.S. have worked diligently to create impressive, useful, and growing historical databases of hurricanes and their occurrences, their paths, their strengths, and their impacts with respect to property, the environment, and most importantly, human lives. In 2011, I conducted on behalf of the BEDC, the Brownsville Economic Development Council, an analysis of existing scientific literature to comparatively assess historical patterns and hurricane threat in terms of risk and frequency between Brownsville and the rest of the coastline, and the Atlantic coastline of the United States. Why would an economic development corporation be interested in such a study? Well, the answer lies in the surprising results of the assessment. My review of the literature, and I must reiterate, this was an assessment of others' peer-reviewed work, not a result of any direct work of mine, showed that Brownsville, Texas has a lower frequency of direct impacts than the majority of the U.S. Gulf of Mexico coastline and much of the eastern seaboard up to Chesapeake Bay over the last 150 years. Researchers found, on average, a 20% chance of any given hurricane of any given category or tropical storm occurring in any given year here in Brownsville. This chance is lower than over 95% of the Gulf of Mexico coastline and 91% of the coastline from Brownsville all the way to Virginia Beach, Virginia. After analyzing just major hurricanes, categories 3, 4, or 5, researchers found that a return period of 52 years, or roughly about a 2% chance of a major hurricane directly impacting Brownsville in any given year. This value is about 60% of what the other coastlines, Atlantic coastlines in the United States up to Virginia Beach, Virginia experience. While it's statistically inappropriate to say knock on wood, if you recall, Beulah was almost 51 years ago. Our return period is 52 years. So I'm sure folks would forgive not tempting fate and go ahead and knock on wood anyway. As my father would say, we're just about overdue. The take-home message I delivered to the BEDC was one they were hoping for, that Brownsville has an overall lower risk of being directly impacted by tropical storms or hurricanes than much of the rest of the U.S. and Atlantic coastline. Their interest in such a result was to present this information to corporations, investors, entrepreneurs, that Deep South Texas was open for business, and that their financial backers might feel more comfortable with the relatively lower risk this area had or experiences with relation to hurricanes to many other coastal areas along the Atlantic. I don't know for certain if SpaceX considered this information directly when choosing their prospective launch location, and I certainly don't speak for them, but one could see how they might have done so and how other corporations might do so in the future. But am I saying there's nothing to worry about for Deep South Texas when it comes to hurricanes? Of course not. All it takes is one impact, one occurrence to bring chaotic damage to infrastructure, the environment, and sadly, and all too frequently, illness, injury, or death. Given that all it takes is one, and that we're due for a major hurricane strike in this area, there's a host of challenges this region faces. And there's far too many to go into detail to keep my comments brief, but I'm going to go into very, very briefly into 5 comments. First, the Rio Grande River. It's a cross-border watershed. It's an international watershed. The area of land that drains to the Lower Grande is mostly in northeastern Mexico. This makes one of the 3 major threats from a hurricane: riverine flooding, storm surge, and obviously local rainfall and high winds. Riverine flooding, or major flooding due from dam failures, levee breaks, or just a raging river such as the Rio Grande can be from time to time, is dependent on an international set of rules, operations, and protection systems. The IBWC, the International Boundary and Water Commission, has a significant challenge in coordinating not one but 2 federal agencies, multiple state agencies, and multiple communities, counties, and city agencies together. They need all the help they can get when it comes time to look at a worst-case scenario for this region. And I'll take an aside to say a worst-case scenario for Brownsville, in my opinion, and the opinion of many meteorologists that I've spoken to, would not be a direct impact. It would actually be an impact just south of us, and a hurricane approaching from the east, obviously a major hurricane approaching from the east. Fortunately for us, they don't often approach directly from the east. They usually come from the southeast. And this exposes us more often to the less dangerous semicircle. It's harder for a hurricane to expose its dangerous right side to us from approaching from the southeast. But every so often, they do come directly from the east. A hurricane approaching directly from the east and impacting just south of us, about 25 miles south of us, and actually landing in Mexico, direct impact in Mexico, would expose us to the direct right hemisphere, the dangerous side, the heavy storm surge, the highest winds, the heaviest rain, and then a few days later, if it continued westward, would approach Monterrey, Mexico, and the mountainous terrain there and dump all its rain in the mountainous terrain as it's forced upward. This means we have a possibly cataclysmic impact on day zero, the day of landing. And then about 7 days later, all that torrential rain comes ripping down the mountains and into Rio Grande, challenging the flood protection system, which is already saturated. Then we have a scenario that is truly devastating for this region. Because we have over 2 million people on the border on both sides here. Our evacuation routes are severely limited. This is the second reason I wanted to, that's something we really need to address. And as this relates to economic development and tourism, people sense this. I think you've got an idea from the previous speakers that perception can often be reality. If you look at Brownsville saying on the border by the sea here, I grew up here in this region before I left for 16 years to serve in the military and get my degrees and then come back. I was always proud of the city. My father always told me this. He would introduce himself to all people around the country when he would travel. And he would never say, we're from Brownsville. He'd always say, we're from Brownsville on the border by the sea. It's a great saying, I'm proud of it. But if you're afraid of the border for whatever reasons, if you are xenophobic, if you happen to be afraid of hurricanes or someone made you afraid of hurricanes, this might not be the place you want to be. Well, the facts show that Texas is a big state. It's also a very capable state, and we have the resources to handle just about anything that gets thrown our way, provided we have the right information and the right data. And that's another point. Deep South Texas has been underserved in many capacities, specifically related to infrastructure. And one of the important things that I want to point out is that we have a staggering lack of hydrologic monitoring equipment in this area. If you look at Houston, Houston has hundreds, if not thousands, of rain gauges and stream gauges sprawled throughout the community. They can develop very pristine and very precise hydrologic flood prediction models at a local scale and supplement what the National Weather Service does at the national scale. We don't have that network here. We need that network here, and we need help to build it and develop it. When that happens, we can supplement now with increased technologies, geographic information systems, LiDAR technology, all sorts of other technology. We can develop spatially precise and temporally more precise and hopefully more accurate models that complement the larger river scale flood models that are present and operated very effectively by the National Weather Service, NOAA, and others. I guess really the last thing I would want to say is that there is a tremendous amount of work resulting from universities and colleges now to develop expertise in-house in this region and try to keep that talent in this area so that we can address this critical shortfall. And hopefully, when that day comes, despite our comparatively reduced chances that a hurricane once again crosses this region's path, we are ready with scientific and engineering-backed data to handle it in the best fashion we can. Thank you for the opportunity to share a few of my thoughts with you this morning. I hope I found it to be helpful and inspire questions and discussion beneficial to our mutual goal of helping our region.
Members, any questions? Oh, well, appreciate your time and pretty interesting getting into the science of what all happens.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
And the chair would like to call up the last witness, the president and CEO of the Brownsville Convention and Visitors Bureau, Mariano Alea. Come on up. And thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman and committee members. My name is Mariano Ayala, President and CEO of the Brownsville Convention and Visitors Bureau. After listening to a couple of the witnesses, Mr. David Teal, TTIA President and City Manager for South Padre Island, I was listening that there's a misconception that they're not open for business due to Hurricane Harvey. Well, I've come across a problem for the city of Brownsville and other border towns that there's a misperception that we're killing each other here in Brownsville because of what's happening in Mexico. So I would ask you as a committee in the state of Texas to help us tell the citizens of the state of Texas and other people that we're safe here, as you well know after being here yesterday, that according to an article by the Texas Monthly in January of 2015, the FBI ranked the city of Brownsville last in the rankings, And our police chief, a couple of weeks ago, stated that for the second year in a row, our crimes have gone down. So I just am asking you as a committee and the state of Texas to please put the word out that Brownsville and other, well, I know for sure Brownsville is very safe, and we would like to promote ourselves as a very safe and open armed city to everyone in the state of Texas and the United States and internationally as well. And that's all I would like to say.
Oh, all right, well, appreciate that. It's good to get the correct information out.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Members, any questions?
Yes, sir.
Just one, just briefly. Mariano, I saw a little banner last night that said All-American City.
Yes, sir.
Can you tell us what that is?
Yes, sir. The city of Brownsville a few years ago applied and is recognized as an All-American City. It means that we're open armed. We receive everyone. We also promote healthy habits. For example, a few years ago, we started the citizens of Brownsville through City Commissioner Dr. Gowan wanted to diabetes is a big problem down here, and she wanted to make sure that we got into our health habits. And with that, we wanted to make sure that everyone knew that Brownsville was a healthy community. We're open to everyone. We're promoting cycling. We're doing a lot of things for the citizens of Brownsville, and thus we're an all-American city.
Congratulations, that's
And I know I'm not doing
important
justice
distinction.
to that. I'm pretty sure Dr. Gowan and other people would have done it a lot better.
That's so good.
So,
Thank you.
Well, very good. And again, we enjoyed our time here, your hospitality. It was nice visiting with you last night. And, of course, wish the city well. It's good for Brownsville. It's good for the state of Texas.
thank you, sir. Thank you.
Members, are there any other items you'd like to discuss?
No.
Well, with that, the chair hears none, and the Committee on Culture, Recreation, and Tourism is now adjourned.